Hello, I'm Arion Petasis, and I've been an international advisor and consultant for over 20 years. One of the areas that I've always found fascinating, but also critical to the success of every firm, is organizational culture. It is really the DNA of the organization that sets it apart from all others, and which is driven by a certain set of behaviors and motivators. And it is also probably the most difficult thing to get right, or at least to partially address. In the last years, we have seen conflicting goals between compliance culture, which pulls the organization one way, and then performance culture that requires a different set of behaviors and motivators. This dichotomy has been especially acute in the financial services industry, which is one of the most heavily regulated of the major economic sectors. Now let's start with compliance culture. Since 9/11, 2001, the volume of regulations that have been issued for banks to comply with has been mind-boggling. The last draft that came as a result of the financial crisis has compounded the issue even more, and the burden just grows and grows. Everything from capital adequacy to prop trading, technology, money laundering, business continuity, etc., the list is endless. And now, there are even more regulations coming in terms of ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, which will force banks to rethink their portfolio allocations in parts of the economy that have yet to fully evolve. And so for the last years, many banks have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to comply with these regulations and putting a lesser focus on strategy and long-term business viability. Many European institutions have also had to do all of this against a backdrop of significant levels of non-performing assets at various points over the last decade. Most people, including myself, will tell you that overall these regulations were necessary and ostensibly make the financial system more secure. One can question the effectiveness of some of them, especially in the AML space, but I don't think that anybody would really argue that it was ever feasible to expect banks to self-regulate in any meaningful manner. However, in order to promote effective compliance, as opposed to this just being a tick-the-box exercise, what you really need is to regulate behaviors and attitude. And this is quite difficult. So much of the challenge comes down to culture, and so banks have invested heavily in the culture of compliance, in developing cultures of compliance, i.e. creating the organizational climate and aligning those desired behaviors in order to get people to comply with all of these regulations. And all of this could be considered a good thing, but there is always the law of unintended consequences, almost like a side effect of a beneficial medication. As you build a culture of compliance at the rank and file level, there is a major tendency towards playing it safe, going for the easy option and avoiding risk. After all, excessive risk-taking was what got banks into trouble in the first place. And in the absence of significant variable pay, why would your average employee do anything other than strictly follow the rules and stay out of trouble? To use the opposite of the well-known cliché, it is very much of in-the-box thinking. And getting out of the box doesn't usually pay off. And all of this would be considered fine if we were talking about utilities, such as the electric company or your local water board. But banks continue to have all the pressures of a private, for-profit organization. They have shareholders who want a return. They have customers who want better service. And of course, there are competitors who are trying to eat into their market share. And what is happening with the regulators? Well, they're demanding that banks become more efficient and more competitive and more innovative in order to meet the needs of the fourth industrial revolution. So while banks have to comply with this endless burden of regulations, they simultaneously have to up their game when it comes to meeting business objectives. But how does having a culture of compliance that is very much geared around compliance, following the rules, etc., as a main priority, align with the need to innovate and be more competitive? Aren't these conflicting goals? The short answer is yes. And competitors are no longer just other banks that have the same set of challenges or problems, but fintechs that are largely underregulated or even unregulated in some situations. They're generally far more nimble and agile firms, and in many cases, they're very well funded. It's almost like a race between one competitor who is older and overweight, and who is also asked to run loaded with a 20-kilo backpack, against a younger, fitter rival that has almost no extra burden, and even comes with his or her own cheering section. So what can be done? It's a tough challenge, but here are some thoughts. 1, develop shared KYC utilities. There is no good reason why banking sectors at the national level don't have a comprehensive shared database of KYC compliance information, much like the credit bureau has a database with customer credit scores. Instead, each bank carries out distinct and detailed KYC checks that frankly don't differ much or add tremendous value from bank to bank. A shared utility would reduce a huge burden when it comes to compliance expenses. And these compliance expenses, in many cases, account for over 10% of banks' operating costs. 2, leverage technology in the compliance space. Even if it's experimental, regulators should further expand regulatory sandboxes in which these technologies can be tested. And here, banks can even team up with fintechs to bring new products to market. One example where compliance costs can be reduced via innovative technologies is in addressing false positives for transaction monitoring alerts, an area that eats up valuable time for compliance officers and which unfortunately produces minimal results. 3, balance compensation to cover both compliance and innovation incentives. This is crucial because financial services institutions must rethink their compensation models in a way that balances the need to comply with the need to innovate. And now that compliance cultures are more embedded within banks, it will hopefully be easier to do this given this more solid foundation. 4, continue to know customers better. So an expanded form of KYC, I would say. Now, almost every bank that I've advised over the past years has put cross-selling as one of their top targets. But it doesn't seem that many banks have really been able to achieve this goal in any substantial way. And I think the problem is really a lack of deeply understanding customer needs. So while banks focus very much on speed and efficiency and how to properly execute a transaction, they still aren't that far along when it comes to really understanding what their clients need, how they operate, and how to properly engage these clients as part of an expanded sales cycle. And knowing your customer even better addresses both sides of the equation, because banks can A, do a better job in the compliance area, and B, sell more products. So it's a classic win-win situation. Now, once these and other measures have been taken, then banks will hopefully be able to get back to working within a healthier framework, and then regulators will be able to gradually shift the emphasis towards innovation and more strategic areas. Now, this will create a more balanced and more sustainable operating framework for banks, which will really have 3 positive consequences. The first is that it will make banks more interesting places to work and allow banks to really compete in this war for talent as it is known. Second, it will unleash more of a creative approach and help to focus on innovation. And 3, it will position banks for the challenges that lie ahead in the coming years and decades. And finding that balance will be crucial. Now, through simple concepts such as the money multiplier and net interest margins, banks have an inbuilt advantage that many industries, pretty much no industry, enjoys. But the time has come to give banks some breathing room and put them in a position to really be able to play the very positive role that they should play in society via a healthier and more sustainable operating framework. So I would say that perhaps now is the time for some real out-of-the-box thinking.